In the clear blue skies above Sardinia, the wail of a twin-engine fighter jet sliced through the calm. The aircraft banked hard, leveled out, and then, without warning, disappeared from radar. 2 seconds later, the simulated target detonated. It was not a missile that had struck it, but data, sensor fusion, real-time targeting, and artificial intelligence, all converging through one machine. Lieutenant Marcus Klein, a German pilot assigned to NATO's Advanced Air Power Initiative, pulled back on the controls of his F-35A Lightning II and exhaled. The test had been a success. The Americans, watching remotely, nodded in approval. But for Klein and his European commanders, the question was no longer about performance. It was about dependence. The F-35 was sleek, silent, and deadly, an apex predator of the skies, but it wasn't European. Every update, every patch, every system check had to be authorized, managed, or overseen by Lockheed Martin or the Pentagon. In an age of rising geopolitical uncertainty, this wasn't just a logistical inconvenience. It was a strategic vulnerability. And as Klein's jet rolled back into its hangar, half a continent away, defense ministers in Berlin, Paris, and Rome debated a future that no longer relied on Washington's shadow. France had sounded the alarm first. President Elodie Marceau, elected on a platform of strategic sovereignty, made no secret of her disdain for Europe's reliance on American tech. "We cannot be renters of security," she had declared in a thunderous speech before the European Parliament. "We must be builders." Her vision resonated, especially after the U.S. unilaterally grounded certain F-35s across Europe in 2024 following a software glitch. Though the move was framed as precautionary, it exposed just how little control European nations had over their own fleets. In the UK, whispers about post-F-35 planning had quietly transformed into serious budget discussions. The Royal Air Force, long one of the staunchest partners in the F-35 program, began allocating funds toward the Tempest initiative, a sleek next-gen fighter jet that promised not just stealth, but autonomy. Yet even as planning accelerated, a cold truth remained. Nothing flew like the F-35, and in every war game it continued to dominate. Klein, meanwhile, was promoted to lead a small multinational team embedded with NATO's Red Shadow Squadron, a covert air doctrine task force. Their goal: determine whether Europe could wean itself off the F-35 by 2040. Their tools: simulations, threat modeling, and a growing library of experimental data. Their challenge: immense. The core of the problem wasn't just political or technological, it was philosophical. The F-35 wasn't just a fighter jet. It was an ecosystem. It could talk to satellites, control drones, jam enemy radars, even sync with naval strike groups in real time. Most European jets, Eurofighters, Rafales, and Gripens, could only dream of such integration. Replacing the F-35 wasn't about building a plane. It was about replacing an entire way of fighting. Inside a glass tower overlooking the Rhine, Director Sophia Ehrlich of the European Defense Technological Authority met with representatives from Airbus, Dassault, and Leonardo. These were not ordinary contractors. They were stewards of Europe's defense future. Ehrlich, a former test pilot turned bureaucrat, understood the stakes better than most. "We cannot outspend the Americans," she told the room, "but we must outthink them." Her proposal was radical: a layered defense architecture where next-gen European fighters didn't compete with the F-35, but sidestepped it. Faster build cycles, modular software, and an open architecture design that could allow even smaller EU states to customize their jets. "We need to democratize air power," she said, tapping the table, "not centralize it in one corporate cloud." But the Americans were watching. Lockheed Martin launched an aggressive lobbying campaign, warning EU states of the dangers of fractured capability. U.S. defense attachés began pressing partners about the continued viability of interoperability. And quietly, Washington hinted that deviation from the F-35 network could affect intelligence sharing agreements. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. Step away, and you might step into the dark. Back in Brussels, Klein prepared for his final flight exercise with Red Shadow. This time, the simulation was different. He would be flying not as an attacker, but as a defender, tasked with repelling a multi-axis assault by drone swarms and enemy fighters. The catch? His F-35 would be stripped of U.S. uplink access. No external cloud, no software patch, no Pentagon watchful eye. Only onboard systems and local support. As the scenario began, Klein's screens flickered. His targeting array lagged. Drone signatures flickered in and out. For the first time, the F-35 felt like a prisoner of its own brilliance, brilliant only so long as it remained connected. He adapted fast, reverting to visual tracking, switching to short-range missiles, pushing his jet to its physical limits. But it wasn't enough. The simulation ended in a theoretical kill. Silence followed. When he landed, his face was calm, but his mind raced. The mission had taught him more than any briefing. The F-35 was unmatched, but not untouchable. Its greatest strength, interconnectedness, could also be its greatest vulnerability. And if Europe couldn't control the connection, maybe it was time to build something it could. By the time Klein debriefed with Ehrlich later that week, the mood had shifted. The question was no longer if Europe should build its own fighter, but whether it could do so in time. Because history had shown one lesson over and over again. The skies belong not to the best plane, but to the one you control. In a concrete command center buried beneath Mont-de-Marsan Air Base, Élodie Marceau watched a projection of Europe's two great gambles flicker across the dark briefing room wall. On the left, the Tempest, a sharp-winged predator in digital blueprints, its cockpit brimming with AI potential. On the right, FCAS, the Future Combat Air System, sleeker, cleaner, and shrouded in Franco-German ambition. These weren't just aircraft concepts. They were statements of intent. Marceau, now not only France's president, but its de facto architect of strategic autonomy, had bet her political capital on proving that Europe could fly alone. Across the Channel, in a high-security lab at BAE Systems' Wharton facility, Commander James Whittaker keyed a flight simulation program into motion. The pilot avatar represented Tempest's imagined interface, a system designed not only to respond to commands, but to anticipate them. Whittaker, once a Typhoon pilot, had become Tempest's fiercest internal critic and unlikely champion. He had seen what the F-35 could do, but he also knew the price of waiting for Washington's next move. "We're flying their jet on their terms," he had once said to a Ministry of Defense review panel. And if they ever flicked the switch, what then? Whittaker wasn't alone. Italy had joined the Tempest project early, offering Leonardo's electronic warfare brilliance and promising access to key aeronautical infrastructure. Japan entered later, bringing the stealth design of its Mitsubishi X2 Shinshin prototype and deep expertise in sensor miniaturization. What began as a British dream had morphed into a tri-continental fighter concept, ambitious, futuristic, and refreshingly un-American. The Tempest, in theory, would be a sixth-generation aircraft, stealthier than the F-35, equipped with loyal wingman drones, capable of AI-assisted dogfighting, and supported by swarms of autonomous systems. Its radar would not only scan, but jam, hack, and deceive. But theory was one thing, production was another. The timeline said 2035. The skeptics whispered 2045. Meanwhile, on the other side of Europe, FCAS stumbled. Born of a powerful alliance between France, Germany, and Spain, it was meant to be Europe's answer to the F-35, a platform that combined manned fighters with UCAVs, or remote carriers. The aircraft would be intelligent, modular, and sovereign, But friction came early. Dassault demanded control of the jet's flight systems. Airbus pushed back, insisting on equal input. Political pressures flared, budgets shifted, deadlines blurred. Inside Airbus's secure development dome in Munich, defense engineer Lucas Zimmer examined a holographic model of FCAS's cockpit interface. He wasn't a politician. He didn't care for speeches or acronyms. What mattered to him was the code, the latency between gesture and reaction, the calibration of sensor input to synthetic display. And on that day, the numbers didn't lie. The software still lagged behind Tempest's mock-ups. Worse, political infighting threatened to delay everything further. Zimmer had once believed in a united European vision. Now, he feared FCAS might become a monument to overreach, a jet designed by committee, flown too late, priced too high. Still, when he spoke with his French counterpart at Dassault, Camille Devereaux, their conversations betrayed a shared fire. "We can't let this become Eurofighter 2.0, she said, referencing the previous generation's fragmented, delayed fighter program. "This time we win, or we concede forever." Both programs were watched carefully in Washington. The Pentagon maintained a studied neutrality in public, but behind closed doors, concern was growing. If either FCAS or Tempest succeeded, it would fracture the West's air power monopoly and reduce F-35's market dominance. Worse, it could inspire others, South Korea, India, Brazil, to pursue similar homegrown platforms, and that, more than any lost sale, threatened the architecture of U.S.-led defense alliances. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, Marcus Klein stood before a panel of military advisors and technology ministers, presenting the Red Shadow Squadron's final report. His team had modeled hundreds of combat scenarios involving future European fighters versus evolving threats from Russia, China, and rogue states. The results were promising, but incomplete. "Tempest wins in the air," Klein said. "FCAS wins in networks, but neither wins in time." He paused before continuing. "If we don't accelerate, we won't replace the F-35. We'll just retire into obsolescence." The room was quiet. A Belgian minister scribbled a note. A Spanish general leaned back in his chair. Only Sophia Ehrlich spoke. "Then we don't accelerate alone," she said. "We do it together. Or not at all." That moment sparked a renewed push across European defense circles. The EU Defense Fund was expanded. A new joint procurement framework was proposed to streamline collaboration. Even smaller states, Sweden, Czechia, the Netherlands, began sending observers to Tempest and FCAS development centers. Slowly, painfully, a sense of shared urgency took hold. But urgency is not momentum. Back in Wharton, Whitaker received word that Japan might pull resources to prioritize its indigenous fighter program. In Munich, Zimmer learned Dassault had once again clashed with Airbus over fuselage control. And in Paris, Marceau faced mounting pressure from her opposition, who accused her of gambling billions on a paper airplane. Yet none of the protagonists stepped back. Because beyond the politics and prototypes, a deeper truth had taken root. Europe no longer wanted to build a better jet. It wanted to build its own future. And that future would not be coded in Washington. As Klein boarded a transport back to Berlin, he caught a glimpse of a scaled Tempest mock-up displayed on a hangar floor. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, more promise than machine. But it was real. It existed. And for now, that was enough. Because for the first time in decades, Europe wasn't asking whether it could match America's air power. It was simply preparing to answer. Snow blanketed the runway at Neuburg Air Base, muting the roar of the Eurofighter's engines as Marcus Klein disembarked into the biting wind. His boots crunched over the tarmac as he walked toward a temporary command center filled with a dozen monitors tracking aircraft across Europe. Above them, the countdown had already begun. In 72 hours, the first full-scale simulation between NATO F-35 squadrons and a prototype Tempest-led European task group would begin. It wasn't a war, but it was everything short of one. This was the proving ground, the moment years of design, debate, and politics would be tested against cold, mathematical precision. Inside, Klein met with Sophia Ehrlich, who looked every bit as exhausted as he felt. "Red team is all F-35s, piloted by Americans and Norwegians," she said without looking up. "Blue team is Tempest prototypes, UCAVS, and AI-assisted Rafales. No U.S. uplink, no outside help." Her tone was measured, but Klein caught the edge beneath it. This was no longer just an exercise. This was a challenge, one that would echo through Brussels, Washington, and beyond. Meanwhile, in Paris, Élodie Marceau convened her National Security Council for what she called a strategic foresight session. She spoke not of simulations or software, but of vision. "This isn't about replacing a jet," she said. "It's about refusing to be replaced." She motioned to a digital map that tracked American defense exports across the globe. "Every fighter jet we don't build ourselves is a vote for dependency. I want Europe to vote for itself." The war game began under a slate-gray sky off the coast of Portugal. Drone carriers launched swarms of UCAVS, unmanned combat aerial vehicles, each programmed with evasive routines and semi-autonomous targeting. Tempest fighters darted through the sky, their fuselages reflecting radar as mere whispers. Against them were the F-35s, faster, tested, and fully integrated into NATO's command net. For every maneuver the European prototypes executed, the F-35s responded with algorithms trained across a decade of real combat data. Klein, flying high over the battlefield, could feel the stakes even through the simulation's safety net. His Tempest responded smoothly, and the AI co-pilot, codenamed Falcon, provided threat vectors, optimized routes, and countermeasure suggestions in real time. It was the first time Klein felt something close to equality with the F-35. The battle didn't swing one way or the other. It hung in a delicate balance, decided not by hardware but by trust in the machine. Back at Wharton, Whitaker monitored telemetry streams. When a Tempest engaged two F-35s head-on and emerged intact, a cheer rippled through the design team, but he didn't join in. "This isn't a win," he muttered. "This is a warning shot. We can match them. But to replace them, we need to do this 10,000 times, in 10,000 different skies." On the second day of simulations, an unexpected scenario unfolded. Satellite uplinks were cut, intentionally by the war game referees. The F-35s, now blinded to their full network, shifted into degraded mode. The Tempests, using onboard AI and local mesh networks, continued nearly unaffected. For the first time, the balance tipped. In Brussels, NATO commanders analyzed the data with fascination and discomfort. The Americans remained cordial, even congratulatory, but there was unease in their tone. General Wallace, the U.S. representative, spoke plainly in private. "It's impressive," he admitted, "but let's not forget, the F-35 is flying real missions today, not 10 years from now." And that was the heart of the issue. Tempest and FCAS were dreams, albeit increasingly tangible ones. The F-35 was fact. It could drop bombs in Syria today. It could intercept Russian jets tomorrow. No simulation, no matter how brilliant, could erase that reality. Yet, something deeper was shifting. European ministers were no longer asking if their jets could win. They were asking when they would be ready. Procurement strategies were updated. Multinational test facilities expanded. Even hesitant nations like Belgium and Greece expressed interest in next-gen collaboration. The American monopoly on air superiority, while still dominant, now had a crack in its armor. Klein's final flight in the simulation saw him pitted alone against 3 inbound targets. His Tempest, out of missiles, relied on evasion, countermeasures, and AI support to survive the encounter. It worked. Barely. When he landed, Ehrlich greeted him with a rare smile. "You bought the illusion long enough for the others to strike," she said. "Sometimes, that's all strategy is." A week later, at a quiet dinner in Berlin, Marceau and Ehrlich met to debrief. They didn't discuss military specs or funding ratios, they spoke of legacy. "When we look back," Marceau said, "this might be the moment we stopped being passengers in someone else's cockpit." Ehrlich nodded. "We're not replacing the F-35, she said. "We're replacing the idea that we have to borrow our wings." Outside, a cold wind carried the sound of distant aircraft overhead. No one could say which model they were. But for the first time in decades, it was possible, just possible, that the skies above Europe might belong to jets built, flown, and controlled entirely by Europeans. The race wasn't over, but it had truly begun.